Welcome in, everybody, to another edition of the Go 24/7 podcast. I'm Matthew Brune, and joining me once again is Shea Dixon. Shea, how are you doing today ahead of what is going to be likely another busy week for you?
Yeah, it's the final countdown because
Mhm.
next Wednesday, after we have the final announcements come in, they hit a dead period. Well, they'll be in a dead period, but the whole month of February is dead. So a nice break, a bit from covering recruiting or tracking offers and coaches on the road and visitors and all that. So it's been a hectic run from the end of the season through all the coaching changes, all the hires, into the transfer portal wave we had, and now wrap up on signing day. We'll get a nice recap or preview of it, I should say, here on the pod today. But it'll be an eventful Wednesday. I think they'll certainly have multiple guys commit to him. And I think at this point, it's just a matter of how they close and how many guys they ultimately sign next week.
Yeah, you did a rundown of their scholarship situation that I highly recommend everybody go check out on the site. So I just want to make sure I have this right and make sure we all have this right on the same page. We're looking at 7 scholarships available at this moment, but if they wanted to get to 85, they could add 8. But the only way they could add 8 is with somebody coming back from the portal. Is that correct?
Well, okay, so they have this thing. You have when you sign out of high school or your transfer, you're called an initial counter, and that means your scholarship. You're part of that initial 25 man limit or whatever it might be.
Mhm.
Well, now we know this year they're allowing 25 plus up to 7 more guys to replace guys you had to enter the portal. Well, LSU's had more than 7 guys enter the portal over the course of the past year, so they can sign up to 32 guys now. They've got 52 returning counters back. So that's guys who have signed with LSU at some point in time. They just transferred in, whatever it might be, and they're on scholarship. They had 13 high school signees back in December. And right now, as the time we're recording this podcast, they have 12 transfer portal signees additions. So that gets you to 77. We know 85 is the limit for NCAA teams that put guys on scholarship. So like you just noted at the start, 8 total scholarships left, but 7 in terms of, or you could use up to 7 in this 2022 class. They're at 25 right now. You can get up to 32. So we've got a handful of high school guys that could fill those spots. And Matty B, I think from there, once we get past next Wednesday, we'll know really, okay, do they have 1 spot left? Do they have 4 spots left? And then they'll be able to decide, hey, look, how do we want to use these down the line in the portal? And I think that will be kind of a popular thing for teams to do is put a scholarship or 2 in your back pocket and say, we're going to wait till spring ball because we might have guys leave and now this position becomes a need for us. Or, Joe Burrow pops into the portal and you don't want to be sitting around saying, well, I've spent up all my scholarship spots. I can't go get a guy like that. So we'll see how they get through next Wednesday, though. I think all the focus right now for the staff is on high school guys and getting through the weekend and into next week.
Yeah, because as far as transfer portal go, obviously the signing day is for high school players. It's not for the transfer portal. So, and what makes this interesting to me is the fact that if we look at the high school targets that LSU has and the guys that we'll get into visits in a second, it's not like we're looking at these guys that they're like, all right, 100% LSU. Like it's a no brainer at this point. There's some battles that they're still gonna be fighting up until the last day, up until February 2nd. So I mean, if we just run through the visitors, I mean, Jacoby Matthews, Harold Perkins, we know those 2 are gonna be battles for LSU to try to win. Trevante Citizen, Danny Lewis, as well. I think they already hosted Trevante Citizen and Danny Lewis was when like middle of the week, I believe it was. So and then yeah, and so then well, I mean, we look at the other guys, and I wrote a story on Jalen Davis Robinson, the cornerback from Waxahachie, and I think that LSU likes where they are with him. I think they like where they are with Caleb Douglas, but outside of those 2, there's a lot in the air still for this team.
Yeah, and I think you kind of let's look at, and you mentioned Trevante Citizen, a running back, 4-star, top 100 guy, was in town this past weekend. And then Danny Lewis was in town midweek, tight end out of Westgate, Wednesday to Friday. And now Friday, they're setting up for this wave of 4 guys. So you've got Harold Perkins, the linebacker, 5-star, Jacoby Matthews, the safety, top 100 player out of Ponchatoula here in Louisiana. And then you touch on Jalen Davis Robinson, a corner out of Waxahachie, and Caleb Douglas, a wide receiver out of Hightower in Texas. And it's almost like you just said, they're going to be fighting some battles down the stretch. And these are kind of for different, or at least different battlefields they're fighting on. With Harold Perkins and Jacoby Matthews, we've known, and you can throw Trevante Citizen in there. We've known about those guys for 2+ years. They've had offers since they were sophomores in high school. LSU's old staff recruited them. LSU's new staff's been recruiting them. They visited campus a million times. Like, we've talked about Citizen and Matthews and Perkins so many times. Hell, Citizen and Matthews have been committed to LSU before. So you're battling this sort of trying to close strong, trying to finish with a bang in recruitments at your program. Now, granted, different coaching staffs, but LSU's program has been in it the whole time, with a couple of other guys in Douglas and then Davis Robinson, who are both coming in out of Texas. The new staff just offered him, and really both of them in the past week and a half. And that quickly led to let's go get on in-home visits and bring Brian Kelly over there and the position coaches. And now let's bring them and their families and parents in for this final weekend. And Davis Robinson out of Waxahachie is coming off an Oregon visit. Douglas is coming off of a Florida visit a couple of weeks ago. So these guys had other teams interested in pursuing them. And now LSU comes in almost in the 11th hour, right? And now you're trying to figure out, hey, how can we close this in a really short window? So like you said, it's tough to just point to any of these guys and say, no doubt 1,000% he's going to LSU. And really for a variety of reasons. And all of them, I think, are going to come down to when they announce them.
Yeah, no, I agree. It'll be interesting to see how Perkins, Matthews, Citizen, all them play out, because in theory, right, obviously I don't know anything, but if they can ink, majority of the targets that they have here that we've listed off, this class looks a lot different. Class looks a lot better, right? I mean, just adding Harold Perkins alone, right, the number one linebacker in the country, will do that. You add Perkins and Matthews and Citizen, then you're looking at this class like, oh, they didn't miss a beat. Like, when Kelly got hired, we were always like, at least I was always like, expect a small step back when it comes to recruiting high school players for this specific class. But if you are able to win these battles that are not going to be easy, and you add these guys to Will Campbell and to Emory Jones and to Walker Howard, then you're looking at a class that's going to be, I think I saw in the class calculator, I think you threw it in there, and it was like top 8, 10, somewhere around there. I mean, that's huge for a freshman class, right? And that's before we even get into the transfer portal.
Yeah, look, and I think when we saw them only sign 13 guys in December, it was kind of like, okay, this will be a smaller class, but they did good, kind of knocking down the dominoes of some really big names in Louisiana. And now let's play best case scenario here. But if you're getting Citizen out of Lake Charles and Matthews out of Ponchatoula, and we'll see what happens with Danny Lewis and Westgate, but Citizen Matthew, you've already got Walker Howard, you've already got Will Campbell, you got Emory Jones, you got Quincy Wiggins, you got LaTerrence Welsh. You can go down the line of really top end Louisiana guys they signed in December. And then you would turn around and you could say, hey, look, then we got Matthews, then we got Citizen, then, we're in it on Lewis, but Matthews and Citizen certainly are ranked as top 10 prospects in the state. And there was that kind of worry moment, right? In December, you signed 13 guys and you said, look, Bama came in and took, Shaz Preston and Kendrick Law and Aaron Anderson and this trio of receivers, and you came up a bit snake eyes there. Everybody else in state that you wanted, you're going to get. And I think that, do you ever want to lose anyone to Bama if you're LSU? No, they're the best team in the country, and you have to play them every year because they're in your division. But on the flip side is LSU's never struggling for receivers. They have a great receiver room, and they went out and get a guy like Kyron Lacey, who is 2 years removed from being with Butte as the number 1 and 2 receivers in the state. He's developed for a couple seasons. You bring him back, and now he's part of a pretty kind of, not the deepest receiver room in the country, but I think you go down it, and every single one of them, you could look at a guy and say, that dude can play, and he'll probably be playing a good bit this year. So I like what they're doing, but again, this weekend will be important. I think without boring everybody with a million kind of projections for how this could go, I'll just say what needs to happen. Matthews, you've got him and his family in town. He's been committed to you before. It's about, feeling that that kind of bond with this new staff? How is he getting along with the safeties coach and Kerry Cooks? How does he get along with the head coach in Brian Kelly? How does he get along with Frank Wilson, the guy who kind of holds everything together for a lot of these Louisiana guys and is really that point of contact? I think that'll be big with Perkins. His mom did an interview with Steve Wiltfong, and she just laid it out. She said, look, they're going to do what Florida did, which is lay out all how we're going to use you and how Harold's going to be used, in the linebacker spot and what the schemes are and all these, how are you going to take care of him in terms of where he's living and, school and tutoring, all these things that come with visits. She knows that's going to happen on LSU too. So what can set LSU apart from Florida or A&M, the other schools that have been really heavily in the mix for him? And she said it's going to be that home feeling. Can we get around LSU staff and feel like, from Brian Kelly down, that everybody really makes us feel like, hey, this is the LSU we've always known? Because she's said to Wiltfong in the story, it's on our website, that she's from New Orleans. A lot of her family's from New Orleans. They've been in Houston. Like, LSU would make a lot of sense. And she said, look, I've always gone to LSU's campus. Every time I go there, I feel like I'm at home because I'm a Louisiana person. I think this weekend's about really drilling that home and trying to make Harold feel like this is the best spot for you. This is the best spot. It's a good family fit where everybody can come see you play and everything like that. And I think culture-wise, he fits in well. Just in terms of, I think Harold Perkins is kind of a Louisiana kid and has been around campus a ton. So it will be interesting to see. Those two, I think, are really important in terms of that family feel. I think with the other two visitors, Davis Robinson and Douglas, it's really about giving them a crash course on the program. I mean, they haven't, Douglas has visited for a game before, but neither of them have had sort of a long weekend where they're going to, visit with professors and look at, whatever department or school they're into and get a full tour of the facilities and sit down with a position coach and go over film and break everything down and all that stuff that Matthews and Harold Perkins and Citizen, those guys have all done plenty at LSU. Those two completely new to the scene. It's almost like we have to just wait and see how the weekend goes before we can really say, all right, I feel good about it. But you talked to Davis Robinson, I talked to the Douglas camp, and you could sense that both of them were pretty excited about just the idea of, I have an LSU offer now. I'm coming on a visit. I have this opportunity in front of me. And it's almost, for me, it feels like, and I've been around it a long time, that when you see kids like that, it's like, hey, I just need to make sure that when we get over there, that for me and my parents, everything checks, all the boxes are checked, because from, 50,000 feet or whatever. And, with these kids just getting an offer and looking at the program, they're saying everything looks perfect. I'd love, that's a great chance for me to go there and be part of something special. I think it'll be a good weekend for LSU. They've got 4 guys, and we broke it down for a variety of reasons. You have different kind of needs for them or paths you're going to have to take over the weekend of how you recruit them and close them. But I think it sets up well because midnight Sunday, Matty B, is the dead period. That means no more face-to-face contact with any recruits. Well, LSU will have the last face-to-face with all 4 of those guys: Perkins, Matthews, Davis Robinson, Douglas. You're coming off, obviously, in-home visits this week and official visits then with Danny Lewis and Citizen. And those are the 6 guys we're kind of watching. And we let off the podcast by saying they've got 7 spots left in this class, whether that's high school, transfer portal, whatever it might be. They've got 6 guys here on the board. How do you close? We'll see. But certainly they're about to cut into that 7 total number by next Wednesday.
Yeah, so we went over the best case scenario. Let's look at the not so great case scenario. Let's say they lose a couple of them, right? I'm curious, as your opinion, if they did, let's say, miss out on 2, 3 of them, let's say, would those spots go to the transfer portal? Or do you think LSU would just not even fill them?
I think it would depend, right? And let's say that for instance, let's say they don't get Danny Lewis, the tight end. They're going to have to go to the transfer portal. They've got 1 scholarship tight end coming back. They're almost going to have to maybe use that. If you go 6 for 6 here, that 7th spot might need to be a tight end at some point. So even if you get Danny Lewis, so I think it may depend on a position. Like, let's say Citizen doesn't come. Well, it stings. You want Citizen, but you also have John Emery and obviously the 2 freshmen, Goodwin and Kiner, and then you've got Trey Bradford coming back, and you just took Noah Kane. So you don't feel that kind of like immediate need of, man, we really need it. Like, he would have been our starter type thing next year. Now we'll see how things go with Citizen, but I think that would just depend on need. But we are, I think, getting closer to them building back up the roster to where they feel good about things. Now, if we get to spring and a couple more guys leave off the team, then all of a sudden they're going to say, okay, we need this 1 or 2 or 3 spots to be spent in this class on the portal. But I don't think, even from talking to sources, LSU knows that we have to get past next Wednesday before we can figure out what the next move is, because really all 6 of these guys would be considered takes, and they're not turning any of them away at this point. They're offering some of them here in the past week to try to get them. So I think you just get through Wednesday. Then you look at what the depth chart looks at like. You say, do I have 1 spot? Do I have 4 spots? And then you sort of press the reset button and say, okay, here's the most important positions, and let's keep monitoring the portal daily. And as soon as we see a guy go in that we like, we're going to go after him.
Yeah, that's going to be the interesting thing to me, because this obviously the December signing day, it was like, all right, we know Walker Howard, Will Campbell, Emory Jones, go down the list. Like the excitement from those guys, or the anticipation, I guess, wasn't as nerve-wracking as I feel like this week is going to be at times. Like obviously there were some questions like Quincy Wiggins, and you go down the list of some other players that may be on the fence, but the December sign day felt a lot more like predictable. And while I think LSU's in a good position with a lot of the guys that they have, especially the guys visiting this weekend, there is a little bit of uncertainty going into this. So that makes it interesting nonetheless to look at that. Anything else before we start looking at the transfer portal from these high school guys?
Well, I think the uncertainty is also felt on LSU's end. I mean, these are coaches who, Brian Kelly's been head coach for 30 years. Frank Wilson's been one of the best recruiters in the country for the better part of 15 years. They've got young guys, old guys, everyone's sort of been around the block. Got here goes. So even them, they're going to figure out kids like, they haven't been somewhere else recruiting these kids nonstop. I mean, by and large, all these kids are having to make up ground within a month. So I think even they go into it thinking, I guess I could feel good here, but I haven't been with this kid for 2 years. I can't tell if, the mom and dad are being honest with me, or if the kid's really into somebody else more than he is to me. That's things you kind of have a feel for, like when you've been recruiting them since they were sophomores and you're not shocked when signing day comes around. You kind of know behind the scenes what their move is. I think right here for LSU, and that's part of kind of the space you operate in when you have a completely new staff top to bottom, minus Brad Davis, whose O-linemen are already all in the boat. He signed him in December. There was nothing to worry about. So I think here there's just a level of uncertainty, even with the coaching staff of, man, we might feel good about this, but not like I might normally would feel good about a guy that I've been recruiting 2 years. And that makes signing day a little bit more eventful for them too.
Yeah. Let's look at the transfer portal here. The only addition, I believe, this week was Jarek Bernard Converse from Oklahoma State. I did do an analysis piece on him. I'm trying to finish up all the analysis I'm trying to get analysis pieces of all of the transfers done. I still have Noah Kane, and then I'm going to take another look at Miles Brennan just to always, it's always good to watch Miles Brennan watch the quarterback. So yeah, I'll get those two out this week. But Jarek Bernard Converse, first team All Big 12 starter for 4 years on Oklahoma State, and a starting corner on one of the top 5 defenses in the country pretty comfortably. So they bring him over to Baton Rouge. I think it's a huge pickup. You put him across from Kai Gardner, and boom, you have your starting cornerback duo, right? And then if they do run a nickel, then you got Greg Brooks. The secondary depth is obviously concerning because, you have some freshmen. You got like Ray Darius Jones and McGee back there as well. But I think from a starting perspective, you couldn't have done much better in the transfer portal, wouldn't you say?
Well, and that's what you've done a great job breaking all these down. So when I tweeted that out and everyone sort of said, and you just how you described it, hey, if I were to tell you LSU's getting a cornerback that was on a top 5, I don't even have to tell you the team name, top 5 defense, almost got into the playoffs, has started 46 straight games, has started from freshman all the way to senior, and was all conference. Is he when you watch the film, is that Matt, like, is he as good as that sounds?
He's as good as that sounds. And he's experienced, right? That's the big thing with this LSU defenses, we were like, all right, it's an overhaul, it's a new coordinator. But when you have experience in the back end, I feel like it makes life easy on just everybody. Defensive coordinator, linebackers. I mean, you go down the list because then there's fewer busts, right? That's what we had talked about this past year is there were just too many busts in the back end. I mean, whether it was Major Burns, whether it was whoever in the back that maybe missed an assignment. And I feel bad for just naming Major Burns because there was a lot of missed assignments back there. But that's what you can't have. And that's what experience in a defense like Oklahoma State, that's what Bernard Converse kind of brings here is that continuity, that experience. So he's very skilled. He's 6'2". He's big. He's fast. He can run with anybody. I never saw him get beat. He's versatile. He played man, played zone. I'm very excited to get him in there. And my guy Gardner was obviously all Sun Belt, which is great as well, and he has experience. But Bernard Converse looks like he could step in and be the number one right away, and be not just be the number one on LSU, but be one of the 6 best corners in the SEC like early on.
Yep, and look, you give Major Burns a shout out there, so we'll flip it on him and give him this bit of positivity. The good thing then at safety becomes, first we thought Jay Ward was about to have to move back to cornerback, no doubt, because they just didn't have any. Now they actually have a couple transfers, so we'll see what happens. But Jay Ward's first year playing safety was last year, and you needed him to be the best safety you had. Major Burns, had transferred in from Georgia. He had played some, but he had never been in a starting role like that. So now he's a year removed from that. He's going to say, hey, look, the game's moving slower for me. I know now where, how I've messed up previously. I've seen the film. I'm better now for it.
Yeah.
Joe Fuchsia comes in out of Arkansas as a guy who's played a ton of football. He's now on the back end for you at safety. And I know you've got young guys that you want to see. Sage Ryan, Matthew Langlois, Derek Davis, Jordan Tolles is still on the team. But those guys all now have some real experience to them. And Major played, all last year minus when he was hurt. Jay played the entire time. And obviously you're bringing in Fuchsia, who's played for multiple years for, starting. And I think DB was a massive concern. I'm not saying they're out of the woods. Like you said, corner depth isn't very good. So that's still a bit of a concern. But they're in much better shape than they were, just even a few weeks ago. I really like how they have addressed the portal. And like I said, we'll see after signing day if they're done with it.
The safety position is deep at this point, right? Like you mentioned, I think Major Burns can make a significant step forward. Jay Ward, if they had to move him to corner, they could. But I think starting him at safety is probably the ideal position for him. And then you bring Joe Fuchsia and Sage Ryan, the guys that you named. So I love the 2-3 deep at safety. Nickel, I think, is fine as well. It's just that cornerback position. That's really all that they have left to fill. And if they can, Jalen Davis Robinson from Waxahachie is obviously a corner as well, and you bring him in, LaTerrence Welsh in as freshman, that gives you 6 corners pretty much, like 6 outside corners, not including Jay Ward. And I feel like we talked about tight end, them needing a starter, and I do think that's the most important spot. But corner is still a spot where you want to go get a guy, and I don't think they would go get a 5th year or 6th year player like they did with the 2 starters. But if you can go get a 2nd or 3rd year guy that has 2 or 3 years of experience left, or two or 3 years left of eligibility, I think that's probably a move that I would like to see.
Yeah, I'm with you on corner because I just think what happens if Mekhi Gardner or Dave or there's so many. We have a lot of hyphenated signees. Yeah, Bernard Converse.
Yeah, Bernard Converse.
Davis Robinson. Bernard Converse. What if one of them or both of them gets banged up? Well, then you're right back to McGee and Radarius Jones, and then that would be your only options. I mean, Terrence Welsh just signed. He's coming off an injury. Doesn't even get here until the summer. Jordan Allen signed. He's more of kind of a nickel safety type. I guess he can play some corner for you. He's versatile. And then we mentioned Davis Robinson out of Waxahachie as a guy that they're going after because they want some young corners with years left, 4 or 5 years of eligibility that they can develop. So the hope would be that he's not out there having to be relied upon next year immediately. So I wouldn't be shocked. I'm with you. Tight end, if they found a center and corner and maybe linebacker would be the positions for me that I would still say if a good one goes in, I'd go after him.
Yeah, no, it does. It'll depend, like we talked about. It'll depend on how they do with the freshmen, and then we'll see, kind of evaluate from there. I think next week when we do this podcast, we'll do it. I mean, whether we do it Thursday or Friday, we'll probably do it Friday because we'll be removed from the signing day a couple days, and we can kind of evaluate where they are and look at it from that standpoint. So that's gonna be real interesting next week to see where they are.
Yeah, no, I'm telling you, after next Wednesday afternoon, we'll have some real clarity on what this roster is going to look like, how many numbers they have. But I'll say, and look, and you can, and I'll always end by saying this: all that matters is what it looks like on the field. Like it's the same thing with coaching hires. Like great coaching hire, okay, well, if he sucks as a play caller, then it wasn't that good of a coaching hire. But we don't get to know that until they actually play football. So I know we'll have to see how good these transfers are, how quickly they can bring along some of these freshmen, how they develop guys on the team. But I've been impressed so far by Brian Kelly, how he put together his staff, and then how that staff sort of quickly turned around and honed in on, 6 high school guys that they really needed, and many of, half of which we knew about all along. The other half are kind of guys who got late offers. And then the transfer portal getting 12 guys, none of which I don't think a month and a half ago anybody, like I couldn't even point to you one guy, even the Arkansas guys, and said, oh yeah, like no doubt, like that guy will go in the portal and they'll go get him. So they, worked with what they had out there. I think they did a good job of evaluating the portal. I think they did a good job of bringing guys in. I think they sold well, kind of the needs, and we saw quickly, bang, like there was one week where they had 8 transfer portal signees or commitments,
Yeah.
and it wasn't like they're striking, $100,000 NIL deals and everyone's jumping on it like a Texas O lineman or something. I mean, this was just, hey, we need this position, get in on a visit, boom, closed, done. You sign, you're in, and now you're on campus. And I thought that was big because yesterday, recording this on Friday, yesterday was the last day to add or drop courses for LSU spring semester. Now there may be a little wiggle room with student athletes or transfers sometimes, but you wanted to get everybody, as much as people as possible, in then, because that meant you were with the team all spring. That meant you left the college you were at and came here, and you can get a head start on academics and all that. And then, obviously, very importantly, you're there for the 15 spring practices and every workout with the new strength staff. So to get what I think they had 11 guys that they signed. The only guys that aren't are Noah Kane, the running back from Penn State, and Jay Bramplett, the punter at Notre Dame. Both those guys are going to stay and graduate in the spring and then come this summer. Everybody else is already here. So you've got 11 transfers and like 5 or 6 early enrollees. So probably like 16, 17 guys in the team right now that weren't on the team when you just ended and had a coaching change, and you get to really kind of knock out some development on that group before the rest of them all get here over the summer.
Yeah, the kind of touching on the initial point you made, I I mean, and you can speak to this a lot better than I can, but just from what we're hearing about this staff and how they're recruiting and how they're building relationships in Louisiana and Texas is tremendous. I mean, when I talked to Davis Robinson and how impressed he was with Kerry Cooks, and then also the coaches at Waxahachie, how impressed they were with Kerry Cooks, and then for Davis Robinson to say that other coaches that he had offers from were talking highly about Robert Steeples was kind of incredible. Like that's
Yeah, you
and
don't
so I
hear that
feel like,
often.
yeah, you don't hear that often at all. So that's, I mean, Cortez Hankin, I mean, you go down the list, these guys are building these relationships. Obviously, Frank Wilson, we know, has these relationships, and not to say these guys don't already have some, but still what they've done so far, and including Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly has been at a lot of schools, has been in a lot of houses, and I'll turn it over to you, but everything I feel like I've read and heard has been overwhelmingly positive. So just the overall impression of Brian Kelly has been uh, really, really good for LSU.
Right. And I'll say what Archmany School, Newman, but Nelson Stewart, their head coach, raved in an article this week on the site about Brian Kelly and when he finally got to sit down and talk with him. And look, I'll tell you, there's Jacoby Matthews, for instance. A couple of people now have told me after the in-home visit this week, and obviously he'll get to spend more time with Brian Kelly this weekend. But when Brian Kelly went there on the in-home after he left, that Jacoby was raving about, hey, look, I really like Brian Kelly, and almost sort of like they had a nice kind of like rapport happen right away. And and I'll give you this statement, and this is not some knock like that other coaches aren't this or that Orgeron wasn't this, but specifically to Brian Kelly. And he's coming from a career, 30 plus years in the Midwest and the Northeast. And there was so much, curiosity about how he would do, not just in the SEC, but in Louisiana and the Deep South. And, much culture shift for him. And we've gotten past the whole family thing and all that. And now he's actually making in-homes and he's going to these places. And two people have told me this, one of them being a parent, another one being kind of just a source in the industry who's close to this family and got a chance to see it. But they said when Brian Kelly you close the door, you're in there, there's no cameras, you're not in front of a big team meeting room talking any of that. It's just y'all in the living room, that he's phenomenal. And they were like, he is so good in terms of getting his point across, selling the program, selling his belief between, the marriage of academics and football and development and graduating and all these different things that I think that's going to be something that at LSU maybe is an unexpected bump for them. Like I think he came here and everyone just said like, man, good thing he hired Frank Wilson. He'll have to do all the recruiting for him. He better hire a staff who recruits for him. And it seems to me, at least the early returns are that, when you've got Kelly there, closing a kid, or when he's got his office door closed and talking with his family or in their living room, that he was great. And I'm not saying he's not great in front of a podium or wherever else, but they were specifically speaking to recruiting and how a kid and a coaching staff close on a kid and sell the program. And I think people have been really impressed. And maybe it's just because we always saw Brian Kelly on TV and he was the Notre Dame coach that everybody loved to hate. And now he's here and there was all this, backlash or national rhetoric of how would it work out. And now that he's going into high schools and going into homes, I think a lot of that rhetoric, at least here in Louisiana, is changing. And these people are saying, look, this guy's got a very detailed plan of what he wants to do, what he envisions from the program, what he envisions from the student athlete, standards that need to be met. And I think when you're dealing with parents who are about to send their kids off to, away from home for the first time, that's a very big deal. And I think he sells it probably with the best of them. And he's got a good track record of saying, hey, look, I've been at Notre Dame. It's one of the highest, learning institutions in the country when it comes to also being good at football. And I think he's trying to carry a bit of that down to LSU just in terms of what he's building and what he wants to see from the program as a whole, which I think if everything works out for them, we'll see how many games they win, but I think that they're going to retain their roster a little bit better because I think it's going to be, you weed out a lot of these guys even in recruiting, and you're not doing it once they get to campus, which I think is just something that you kind of do over time and learn over time as a head coach.
Yeah, no, Brian Kelly is off to a great start, and next week when we do this podcast, he could be off to a phenomenal start.
He has won no games. Let us just make sure we're saying that right. That we always have to end by saying this does not mean that they're going to win a lot of games.
0-0, 0-0 at the moment.
That's a perfect record, I guess. 500.
There you go, undefeated.
However you want to look at it.
Undefeated. So, all right. I think that's all we have for y'all today. We appreciate y'all joining us. You can check out our site at go247.com. We got everything with the latest in the official visits that we've kind of touched on in this podcast. We got the latest with basketball news. But yeah, recruiting, big week. We're running a 60% off annual VIP pass on Go247 right now. Special offers on our homepage. You can just go to our home site, press it, and become a subscriber for 60% off an annual deal. Check that out for sure and send it to somebody who maybe has been waiting for this as well. Maybe somebody that you forgot their Christmas present or something. So, yeah, you can follow us on Twitter at Go247. You can follow me on Twitter at @MatthewBrune_, Shea at Shea Dixon. And yeah, we thank y'all for joining us. Leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you're listening, and we'll talk to you later.